All right, hello everyone. Hola, Max. This is the first of two lectures that you'll be watching while I'm gone. I know that you've been praying for me on my trip. I appreciate that. Again, as I told you before I left, my plans are to be back in the classroom on Friday. And so today and tomorrow, you're going to be watching these videos, and it's going to be just like normal. You're going to open up. In fact, you should already have opened up the slides, Google Slides, and just follow along. You should have 9.1 open, which you can see is the first lesson in a series of lessons that we're calling the making of medieval Europe. Let me say something about the word medieval. The word medieval is a word that that actually means Middle Ages. Um, the Middle Ages is a time period that is roughly from the fall of the Roman Empire. The fall of Rome, which you learned was about around 476, AD 476. And it stretches to the time of the beginning of the Renaissance, which is around the 13th to 14th centuries. So it's a pretty good time period. 5th century till around 13th century, 14th century. So about 9 centuries of time, about 900 years roughly, is the time frame for the Middle Ages. And what we're going to be doing in this set of notes today and tomorrow, and then when I get back, is we're going to be looking at the way that things developed in different countries, what we consider today England and France and Germany, even a little bit of Italy, Spain to a degree. We'll be talking about some of those places. Although you have to understand, in the Middle Ages, especially in the early Middle Ages, those places weren't known as France or England or Germany like we know them today. In fact, I think I've already told you that there's not a Germany on the map of Europe until the late 19th century. Well, let's get into this lesson today. Again, looking at Clovis, the Franks, and then Charlemagne. These are connected, and you'll see how as we work through the notes. So, who exactly were the Franks? Well, the Franks gradually became the most powerful of the Germanic peoples. So, we talked about Germanic tribes that were responsible for the fall of Rome, the Vandals, the Visigoths. There were other Germanic tribes. Some I know you've heard of, the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes. Well, another powerful Germanic tribe was the Franks. They rose to power in the 5th and 6th centuries. Notice several small Frankish kingdoms developed. So there was not one united Frankish kingdom at the beginning. Just like so many other things that we've talked about, it takes time for these unified kingdoms and countries to develop. Out of these new Frankish kingdoms, however, came a new empire that temporarily reunited Western Europe. And when I say reunited Western Europe, remember that Western Europe had been united under the Roman rule, and then things began to dismantle and fall apart. Well, under the Frankish kingdom, there's going to be a reuniting of Western Europe, not to the degree that it was under the Roman Empire, but still a forming of a new empire. So Clovis became king of the Franks. You can see here in AD 481. So I've been saying 5th century AD. That's the late 5th century AD. Now you can see here he eventually controlled all of what we now call France. So he manages to bring all of these Frankish kingdoms that had developed together. He converted to Christianity. His story is similar in some ways to the story of Constantine. You may recall how Constantine um, converted to Christianity and made Christianity a legal religion in the Roman Empire. Clovis converted to Christianity and required soldiers to be baptized. So again, it's like I said when we talked about Constantine, just how spiritual of a conversion this is. We're not able to say, to force it upon people is not the same as the work that the Bible describes when someone comes to Christ by faith. That's a work of the Spirit of God, not something that's forced upon someone. So I'm going to go ahead and close out this window so that you can see this better. Clovis gained favor with the Roman Church. So the head of the Roman Church. Now remember what we told you. When Rome fell, that doesn't mean that the church ceased to exist in Rome. It went on existing under the leadership of the bishop who would eventually become known as the Pope. Well, this head of the Roman Church put his approval upon Clovis and upon his empire. All right, we'll move on then. Next. If I can get this to work. Here we go. Next. The descendants of Clovis established what's been called by historians the Merovingian house. It's named for Merovech, who was one of the early ancestors of Clovis. So we're talking about the Merovingian line of kings. As you read about this line of kings, you'll find out there was a lot of infighting, a lot of jockeying for position. Some, however, historians refer to these Merovingian kings as do-nothing kings. And the reason they call them do-nothing kings is they basically used the position of king for themselves, for their own advancement, so they could become wealthier as persons, but they didn't really do things that helped their kingdom. Now, these kings, these Merovingian kings, these do-nothing kings, had what we might call right-hand men, some men in high places of authority that were very important advisors. In fact, these men were called mayors of the palace, and this is where the real authority or the real power lay in the throne or in the kingdom, I should say. These mayors of the palace were making the most important decisions. And so this is going to play an important role in an establishing of a new line of kings. So just follow along. You'll see why I say that. So you see here the real power behind the throne was in the mayors of the palace. And over time, their responsibilities increased. Give you just a minute or a second to get that typed in. All right, let's move on then next. One of the most important men to hold the position of mayor of the palace was Charles Martel. Now, you may recall him from the Battle of Tours. He is the one who won that victory in AD 732. As we've already learned, that was a battle that was fought when Muslims were attempting to invade Europe. Charles Martel was one of those powerful mayors of the palace who led Frankish troops into battle and defeated the invading Muslims. Of course, the word Martel, I think I told you this in previous lecture, but the word Martel means the hammer, Charles the Hammer. Every time I think of this, I think about the commercials about Jim Adler, the Texas Hammer. That's the guy that screams, if you haven't heard the commercials. All right. Pepin the Short doesn't sound like much of a name for a leader, but it's still, that's how he was known. So that's how you need to learn him. Who is Pepin? Well, Pepin was Martel's son. Remember Charles Martel, then the mayor of the palace who won the Battle of Tours. This is Martel's son. And Pepin appealed to the Pope regarding the situation in the Frankish kingdom. He went to the Pope and said, I believe I should be the one who should be called king. After all, the authority lies in me as mayor of the palace. These kings don't have the authority. I do. And so he turned to the Pope for the Pope's approval. The Pope approved of his seizing the throne. So Pepin seized the throne from the Merovingian king and began a new dynasty. Historians refer to this dynasty as the Carolingian dynasty, which gets its name from its most famous member, Charlemagne. Okay, we're dealing with French-based words. Charlemagne is the same as Charles the Great, and Carolingian is related to the name Charles, so that's why it's called the Carolingian dynasty. In fact, we have two states in the United States that bear the name Carolina, North and South Carolina. They're named for King Charles of England, so you can see the connection there. Carolingian then is this new dynasty that's going to replace the Merovingian dynasty. Keep this in mind. Merovingian kings, that was the line known as the Do-Nothing Kings, established by Clovis. Here is a new dynasty, the Carolingian dynasty, established by Pepin the Short. Pepin helped out the Pope in Italy by conquering the Lombards. This is another Germanic tribe. This tribe was in northern Italy. After Pepin conquered the Lombards, he took that land, the Lombard lands, and gave them to the Pope. This goes down in history as something known as the donation of Pepin, the gift from Pepin, who now is king of the Franks, a gift from Pepin to the Pope. So for years, for centuries, really, folks, for centuries, the Pope is not only going to be a religious leader, but he is also going to be a secular leader over this plot of land known as the donation of Pepin. It's located in Italy. These lands eventually became known as the Papal States, making the Pope a ruler involved in European politics. As I just said, then, for the next 1,000 years, popes not only led the church, the Roman Catholic Church, but they also ruled as kings over the region. All right, we have that. We will move on next. So let's talk about the Empire of Charlemagne. As we've already mentioned, his name means Charles the Great. And as we've already noted, he was the son of Pepin the Short, making him then the grandson of Charles Martel, who again won the Battle of Tours. So from mayor of the palace, the descendants of Charles Martel become kings. Well, Charles the Great, or Charlemagne, made war and his several successful conquests. Well, I guess if it was conquest, it was successful, wasn't it? He's responsible for conquest, let's put it that way. He defeated the Lombards again. The popes were not able to keep the Lombards at bay there in northern Italy. They began to rise up, and so the Pope requested help, and Charlemagne was glad to come to the Pope's help and put down the Lombards again. They also defeated the Saxons of northern Europe. You surely remember that, the name of that Germanic tribe, because many of the Saxons will eventually make their way over to what is now England. Also, he drove Spanish Muslims back across the Pyrenees. I wish I could pull a map up right now. Uh, if I was in the classroom, I'd walk over to the map right now. Just remember the Pyrenees is a mountain range that separates France and Spain. Well, these Muslims had invaded lower France, southern France, and even though they had been defeated at the Battle of Tours, they still continued to remain in what is now southern France. Charles Martel had defeated them at Tours, but didn't drive them completely out. His grandson Charlemagne does. He drives them across the Pyrenees back into Spain. So Charlemagne's empire is going to lay the foundation for modern states of France, Germany, and Italy. Give you just a second to get that typed in. All right, next slide. So here is a map. Well, I can show you the Pyrenees now. Here are the Pyrenees Mountains. If I can get this cursor to come up. The Pyrenees Mountains. And so here's where Tours is. So this is where Charles Martel defeated the invading Muslims. He drove them back, but did not drive them out. Charlemagne will drive them out. Notice Charlemagne's empire. You can see from here the color, 768. So this is the height of the empire while Charlemagne is alive. By 814, or excuse me, this is the beginnings of the empire. He will live up until 814, so this will be the empire at the largest extent. Again, you can see where the Lombards were, and so this is a group defeated by both Pepin the Short and Charlemagne. All right, let's move on then. So Charlemagne's empire, again, he divided it into hundreds of administrative districts. They were called counties, much like what we have here in Texas. Texas is divided into counties, only they're not run by counts, but they're often run by county judges. These counts were responsible for administering justice in the various counties. Charlemagne realized early on that he couldn't be responsible for administering justice everywhere, so he delegated responsibilities. Another job of the counts would be to maintain peace in these counties, because if peace is maintained in the individual counties, then peace would be maintained throughout Charlemagne's empire. The Missi Dominici, the words Missi Dominici are Latin, and they mean messengers of the king. So who were the Missi Dominici? Well, these were two individuals sent out in order to make sure that the counts were doing right in the counties. So you can see here they were sent out in pairs to investigate the local authorities to make sure they were doing what was right, doing what the king wanted done. You're not going to be taking these notes, but the Missi Dominici were appointed, as it says, in pairs, and they could only serve for a brief period of time together before they were divided up and paired with someone else. And one of the reasons Charlemagne did that is to keep corruption from becoming a part of the Missi Dominici program. He felt like if two people worked together a little too long, they could figure out how to work the system and would be corrupt. So he wanted them to not serve together for long periods of time. This is a very important event, ladies and gentlemen. I can't emphasize this enough. You know what the word precedent means. Precedent is when something is established that has ongoing consequences for the future. This is precedent. Charlemagne is going to be crowned the Roman emperor, and he's going to be crowned by the Pope. So this is on Christmas Day in the year 800. The Pope is Pope Leo III. This is so important, as I said, because it's going to raise the question of authority in Europe. Whose authority was supreme? Was it the authority of the state or the authority of the church? Did everyone get that? Now, let me go ahead and explain why this is important. And then we'll get on to the next slide. The Pope crowns Charlemagne. Now, Charlemagne can claim to be king, and he was king, he was the emperor. But popes will begin to point to this event. Future popes will point to this event and use it to say that earthly authority comes through divine authority. To say it another way, kings rule because popes allow them to rule. That will be the big argument that's going to take place in Europe for the next several centuries. And popes and kings are going to go at it as a result of this. And popes are going to use certain means to control kings and thereby control kingdoms. So that's why I'm saying this is such an important event, because it, in a way, as I said, popes are going to argue that we have the ultimate authority because we are the ones that can make kings. All right, here we go. Charlemagne in education. He brought a leading scholar by the name of Alcuin of York from England into his court. Alcuin was responsible for palace education. He desired for one of the things Charlemagne wanted was a better educated clergy. We're talking Middle Ages, folks, and we're talking about a time when some of the church leaders, that's what clergy are, those who are over local parishes, they weren't able to read. And so everything that they told the people, they told from rote memory. Monasteries began to develop in what is now France, but monasteries became primary centers for study, copying, and preservation of ancient manuscripts. The way that worked is you would have one person who would be a reader, and you might have several persons who would be copiers. So as the reader would read the text, then the other people would sit at their desks and they would write these words out. And that's how manuscripts were multiplied. I mean, they couldn't take them into the office and run them off on the copy machine. And printing presses are a long way from being developed. And so this is how you multiplied written documents. One of the things that develops during this time period is something called Carolingian minuscule. It's a beautiful style of handwriting developed by the monks during the time of Charlemagne. And in the picture, you see an example of Carolingian minuscule. Minuscule just refers to the fact that they're lowercase letters. And by the way, this is from the scriptures. Very first word is Deus, meaning God. And in this time period, they would do the copying of the letter of the main portion of the words. Then they would send the copy off for an artist to do a special drawing of the very first letter, which here is a D, Deus. And then also they would put drawings on the pages. You should be able to tell what story this is. This is actually the story of the Magi visiting Mary and the Lord Jesus. You can see the star here. Interestingly, they're dressed like Europeans, but that would be expected because these are Europeans that were doing this work. Disintegration of Charlemagne's empire. Charlemagne died in 814, and when he died, his empire passed on to his son. His name was Louis the Pious. But Louis the Pious had three sons who began to quarrel over who was going to inherit their father or their grandfather's kingdom. So these three sons quarreled over who would inherit what portion of the empire. The rivalry was so intense that they were fighting between themselves or amongst themselves even before their father Louis died. Give you just a second to get that typed. I know I went through that at a quicker pace. All right, let's go to this slide. Treaty of Verdun, very important, folks. This will be something that will wind up in the dates Quizlet. The Treaty of Verdun was signed in 843 by the three sons of Louis the Pious. They were Charles the Bald. You can't make this stuff up, folks. Charles the Bald, yes, more than likely called that because he was bald. You can see over here on the map the region that he ruled. Louis the German, right here to this side, maybe Louis, but I'll go ahead and say Louis the German. And then Lothair, who retained the title of emperor. His kingdom is here in the middle. By the way, notice this color and notice right here. These are the Papal States. Again, this was the donation of Pepin to the Pope. So again, the Pope is not only a religious ruler in Rome, but he is also a secular ruler over these kingdoms or over those parcels of land. Okay, finally, problems from without. The kingdom of Charlemagne began to disintegrate or fall apart after the signing of the Treaty of Verdun. And this is for several reasons. One thing would be Muslim raiders who came in from North Africa and pestered these people in Europe. Now, it was not a full-scale Muslim invasion, but Muslim raiders. Secondly, the Magyars, who were Asiatic nomads, you can see that they're coming in from Asia and they are infiltrating certain places where Charlemagne's kingdom had been established. The Vikings from Scandinavia also came in from the north. Interestingly, I just want to point this out. Notice that one of the arrows brings them to this area, which will eventually become Normandy. And this is where William the Conqueror will eventually rise up as a powerful medieval leader, and he will invade England. We call that the Norman invasion. That's coming later. As the empire crumbled, powerful nobles became more important than weak kings. That's actually going to lead to something that we call feudalism. Kings are going to become less and less powerful, and nobles are going to become more important and more powerful. Kings are going to eventually look to the nobility for protection. And so that tells you immediately where the real power is going to be. It's going to be in the nobility and not in the kings. Okay. All right. Very good. That brings us to the end of that set of slides. I'm not sure I can bring my camera back up, but that's okay. You know what I look like. So what you need to do is make sure that you go over these notes. You will be tested over this at some point in the coming future. I'm not sure yet when we'll schedule the tests, We have several sets of slides that we'll be covering in this unit. This is not a short chapter. So I'll do my best to break it up some to where we'll have a quiz at least halfway through the chapter. I know that some of you appreciate when I do that, because that gives you an opportunity to do a little bit of intense study to prepare for some sort of written assignment. Okay, it's Wednesday, it's chapel schedule, so I know the bell's going to be ringing here in a few minutes. Thank you for giving your attention to the slideshow, and I'll turn things back over to your substitute.